just to introduce myself, although Zach did a terrific job of introducing me, um, I have lived in Concord for over 30 years. I've been a member of the First Parish in Concord for 28 years, and I got into the public history business after a long career in printing and publishing. And um, what I want to talk about tonight is what we celebrated last year, the beginning of the American Revolution, and how that came to happen in Concord. I want to frame that though, because we've been talking so much about spirituality and transcendentalism. I want to frame that in the context of um, the First Parish in Concord. Um, First Parish in Concord was, well, the town of Concord was founded in 1635 by English Puritans who had come here because the Church of England was not letting them worship according to their faith in England. And the first thing they did was to call Peter Bulkeley as their minister. Peter Bulkeley, that's a portrait of him. He was from Kent in England, and he became one of the leaders of the new town. This place was inhabited thousands of years before the English came here. The ancestors of today's Nipmuc and Wampanoag people have been living here for thousands of years, and the native name for this place is Musketaquid, and that is just like musket with AQUID on the end. And the English came then in 1635. They I think the native people welcomed them. I think the native people's idea was that they would all be one big happy family and all live there together. Of course, the English didn't see it that way. The English did not take over the land by warfare. They took basically, just once they got here, they fenced the land in for farming. Or for grazing livestock. They used the land in ways that made it inaccessible to the people that had been living here. Um, they built a meeting house, a very plain, simple meeting house that was intentional. As Puritans, they were rejecting the ostentatious architecture and decoration of the Church of England, and by extension, the Catholic Church. So they wanted their houses of worship to look very plain and simple. This is not the one in Concord. This is the one in the neighboring town of Sudbury, but most scholars believe that this is what the one in Concord looked like. Um, Now, that was built around 1636. About 35 years later, this was replaced by a new building on the other side of the road, which looked kind of like this. Again, this is not the Concord one, but it's what the one in Concord looked like. We do have evidence of that. And wasn't just the architecture that was changing, uh, the theology was changing. Uh, Between 1635 and 1670, you had a civil war in England, but once the Civil War in the 1640s ended, uh, you saw a lot more migration from England to Massachusetts. And so you saw the population of Concord growing, and a lot of the new people were not Puritans. And so you start to see a more liberal drift in the theology of the church there. Um, in 1711, the first parish replaced that building I just showed you with a larger building, which you can see half of in this picture because that's all there is. This is a picture by Amos Doolittle from 1775. So that's what the meeting house looked like in 1775. Um, and In 1765, the first parish called as its minister one William Emerson, recent Harvard graduate, and historian Robert Gross, who I will frequently refer to, He lives here in Concord. He taught at UConn for many years, and he won the Bancroft Prize in '77, I want to say, for his book, The Minutemen and Their World, which I'll show you later. So in his book, The Minutemen and Their World, Robert Gross writes, Emerson proved to be something of a religious liberal. Uh, he cared little for theological niceties. If a man professed religious belief and was of good character, Emerson thought, he should be admitted to the church. So between the 1600s and the 1700s, we've gone from being Puritan to being basically congregational. But we've still got the Trinity, and we've still got the Eucharist. Now, a later Concord minister, 20th century Concord minister, Reverend Dana Greeley, was writing about Emerson, and he tells us that Emerson was an advocate of liberty, political liberty, especially. He became a fiery patriot preacher and the chaplain of the Concord Minutemen. So this was the first parish in Concord on the eve of the American Revolution in 1775. And that's an important perspective because in Massachusetts, it was not until the mid-19th century that you saw separation of church and state. Until 1825, First Parish was the only church in Concord. Didn't become Unitarian until 1825, but it was the only church in Concord. So the minister's salary was paid out of taxes. The affairs of the church and the affairs of the town were the same thing. So it's impossible really to talk about the history of Concord in colonial times without talking about the history of the first parish. So we're about to witness the beginning of the American Revolution, but the beginning of the American Revolution did not happen suddenly or unexpectedly. It was the culmination of maybe 12 years of escalating disagreement with England. So let's go back to 1763. So this is 12 years before the Battle at the North Bridge. 1763. I'm showing you a map, and what you see on the map here, this is the territory that England controlled at the end of the 7 Years' War. 7 Years' War, what we call here the French and Indian War. So this is the territory. England controlled everything from Labrador to Louisiana. They won big, but it was a costly victory for them. It set them back 59 million pounds in 18th century money. And so they needed to get some money. They needed to get a lot of money, and they needed to get it fast. Now, since all of this money had been spent fighting a war in North America, they said, well, let's get the North American colonists to pay for that. So in 1765, now, we have the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act imposed taxes on a wide variety of paper goods and documents, even playing cards. Well, people did not like this. It's not as though they had never paid taxes before. You know, a lot of the necessities of life were imported from England, and people expected to pay taxes. But this one really, beyond the financial burden, there was the idea of a lack of autonomy, that this was a parliament that we had not elected, imposing unilaterally this tax on the people in the American colonies. And people turned out and they burned all of the stamp products. They burned the tax collectors in effigy. There were really very radical protests about the Stamp Act, and the Stamp Act pretty quickly proved unenforceable. So that in less than a year, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act. Problem was, though, they still needed money. And so what they did was to impose some new taxes, the Townshend Acts in 1767, and that's taxing everything: china, glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. And tea was the one that really got on people's nerves. Um, and people start boycotting British imports in protest of the Townshend Acts. Um, England is going to send soldiers to Massachusetts to keep these protests under control. This is an engraving by Paul Revere. He was a silversmith, but he also was an engraver and did a lot of these pictures. Paul Revere also dabbled in dentistry, which apparently you didn't need a license for in those days. Um, but he was part of the gig economy before it was cool. This engraving shows British warships unloading, and you can see the redcoats here. They're getting off the ship and they're marching up the long wharf there. There's going to be thousands of British troops brought into Boston to keep the protests under control. Now, where you have a large occupying military force that is sharing the same streets and taverns, and in some cases even the same houses as the civilian population, there's going to be some tension and there's going to be some friction, and occasionally there is going to be some violence. And in 1770, there was violence. There was the Boston Massacre. This is another engraving. You've probably seen this. It's widely reproduced. The engraving of the Boston Massacre, also by Paul Revere. Now, Paul Revere was making these and selling them. This was something he did as a job, but also this is a piece of propaganda. The Boston Massacre didn't really look like this. The Boston Massacre was more of a free-for-all. You certainly did not have the British troops line up in formation. You did not have an officer give them the order to fire. Things, like I say, it was more of a free-for-all. But Revere wanted it to look like this because Revere wanted to make the redcoats the bad guys in this. Now, this could have started a war, but it didn't. In fact, the British troops who killed American civilians, killed 5 American civilians, they were put on trial. Um, but although this didn't start a war, it certainly did not make relations between the colonies and England any better. So you were going to continue to see protests going on. Um, Eventually, the Townshend Act taxes are going to be mostly repealed. The one that does not get repealed is the tax on tea. And that really was a deal breaker because you see, tea was expensive. Tea was imported, tea was expensive. But nevertheless, everybody drank tea. The way that I look at it is you want to think about your smartphone, right? Your smartphone costs you a lot of money. But everybody's got one, or just about everybody's got one. And if somebody came along and slapped a big tax on with smartphones, I know you all would be out there on the protest lines, and I would be right there with you. And so people were protesting about the tax on the tea. They were burning tea. They were boycotting tea. And of course, the most famous protest, as you all know, is the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Um, this is a 19th century lithograph by Curran, but it's pretty accurate. You had 150 men sort of disguise themselves by dressing up as natives and boarding the ships and throwing what today would be $1 million worth of tea overboard. But they had an audience. There were a bunch of patriots that were on the dock here, just cheering them on. Um, and Interestingly enough, there was an English warship in the harbor when this happened. There were British officers on a ship watching this happen, but they did not attack the protesters. And I think they were worried about starting a war. They were worried that they might accidentally shoot some of the audience on the shore, uh, and they didn't feel it was their place to do that. But when the word got back to Parliament in England, they were not so mild-mannered about it. The Prime Minister of England at the time, Lord North, um, declared Boston had been the ringleader in all riots, he said. Um, Therefore, Boston ought to be the principal object of our attention for punishment. Um, so Parliament imposed what we call the Intolerable Acts. Um, and the Intolerable Acts closed the port of Boston, um, and imposed a lot of other restrictions. But the most intolerable of all the intolerable acts was the Massachusetts Government Act, which effectively removed the elected government of Massachusetts, revoked the charter of Massachusetts. They installed basically military rule. They brought in General Thomas Gage, who you see there in the portrait by John Singleton Copley. That portrait is in the Yale Museum of British Art. If you ever get up to New Haven, you can see the original. Um, General Gage, and they gave him thousands of soldiers to enforce his orders. Um, they removed the elected assembly of Massachusetts and replaced it with military rule. They restricted town meetings. You couldn't have town meeting unless General Gage approved it. Town meeting was how all of your local government business got conducted. So this was too much for the people of Massachusetts to take. Um, Even as a British colony for 150 years, they had been accustomed to a pretty liberal amount of self-government. And this is now suddenly taken away from them as a punishment for the Boston Tea Party. And they see a government that is no longer accountable to its citizens. And they know that situation is not going to change unless they change it. So that elected assembly of Massachusetts, which had been basically put out of work by the Massachusetts Government Act, instead of going home like they were told to do, they secretly reconvened as a shadow government, calling themselves the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. And they elected John Hancock as their president. Another John Singleton Copley portrait. He was painting portraits on both sides. Eventually, he did have to pick a side, Copley, and he moved to England. But he was the equal opportunity portrait painter. So in October of 1774, the Provincial Congress, they couldn't meet in Boston because that's where the British Army was. But remember, the minister of the church in Concord is Reverend William Emerson, the Patriot preacher. So he invites the Massachusetts Provincial Congress in October of 1774 to meet at his meeting house in Concord. Someone will use it on Sunday. You guys can use it. And they would have their executive sessions next door in the Wright Tavern with John Hancock presiding. The Wright Tavern is still there. That is a historic house that you can visit. The Hill Burial Ground here is still here. The First Parish Meeting House is still on that site, but it doesn't look like that anymore. And next week I can show you a picture of what it looks like now. Some of you maybe have already seen it. What the Provincial Congress, the word that the Provincial Congress is going to send out from their meeting to all the towns in Concord is, we have a big problem here. The British Army, which used to be protecting us, is now threatening us. And we cannot, in good conscience, sit by and allow this threat to hang over our and our families' heads. We need to be able to defend ourselves if they attack us. And so what we're going to do, we're going to start training up companies of Minutemen. Every town every town in the American colonies had militia. And militia was just every able-bodied free man ages 16 to 60. And the Minutemen were the elite fighting force. They weren't the 16-year-olds. They weren't the 60-year-olds. They were the best fighting men that were trained up out of the military. I characterize them as the Navy SEALs of the colonial militia. Now, if you've got an elite fighting force, they're going to need some weapons. So the provincial Congress directed these towns to start stockpiling arms and ammunition, enough to equip an army of 15,000. Just for point of reference, that's 10 times the population of Concord in 1775. Can't hide the weapons in Boston because that's where the British Army is, so they're going to hide them in people's attics and cellars and barns here in Concord and west of here in Worcester. Now, on April 8th of 1775. Now we're right on the brink here. We're in April of 1775. The provincial Congress resolved that it was, quote, necessary for this colony to make preparations for security and defense by raising and establishing an army. This is more than a year before the Declaration of Independence. We're not a country. We are part of England. We are a British colony. The only army we're supposed to have is the British Army. So the fact that we are establishing an army is very, very illegal. Also, they printed a booklet of rules and regulations for the Massachusetts Army. They deliberately created a paper trail for this tremendously illegal thing that they're doing. Now, General Gage back in Boston is starting to get a hunch that we're up to something out here. So 251 years ago tomorrow, on March 20th, 1775, General Gage sent two of his officers, Captain John Brown and Ensign Henry de Bernier, to disguise themselves as civilians and go to Concord to do some espionage. And they drew this map. This is actually this is a huge map, but this is just a detail of the map that shows Concord. And they wrote on the map, the town is well inhabited and on an entire plain, a shire town and great thoroughfare, the roads wide and fit for encampments. Shire town means the courts are there. So they went back to Boston and they told General Gage that Concord was, quote, an armed camp with sentries posted at its approaches and vast quantities of munitions on hand. So Gage now knows what's going on. He is going to assemble a force of more than 700 soldiers, infantry, that he is going to send out to Concord. Their mission is not to start a war. Their mission is to make it impossible for us to start a war by destroying our supply of military equipment. So here's Boston. Here's Concord. This is a National Park Service map that I have just adapted for this purpose. It's a little confusing because north isn't straight up. It's kind of cockeyed, but it gives you the general idea of light. Boston doesn't look like this anymore. This is all land over here, but it wasn't filled in until the 1800s. So the Charles River was much wider in 1775. Also, the Charles River, there is now a dam at the mouth of the Charles River, but that wasn't built until like 1890, 1900. So in 1775, the Charles River was tidal. It actually rose and fell with the tides, and it was brackish near the mouth. So Boston at this time has a population of about 15,000 plus the occupying army. Concord has a population of about 1,500. And Lexington is just a small farming town with a population of about 700. So Gage's order to his troops is to march to Concord with the utmost expedition and secrecy. So he sent his troops across the Charles River here um, to Cambridge. So it's going to be about 20 miles to Concord. That's a pretty healthy march. Um, this part is going to be tricky because he's got 700 infantrymen and he's got to row them across the river in rowboats. And that's gonna take a pretty long time to get them all over there. Um, Now, in a city the size of Boston in 1775, you couldn't move 700 troops across the river without people noticing. And even if you did it at 10 o'clock at night, which is what Gage did. Um, and so on the night of April 18th, Paul Revere directed a fellow patriot to hang the two lanterns in the steeple of the North Church. It was called Christ Church. It was an Episcopal Church of England, the steeple of the North Church, as a signal. So this is a signal to the alarm riders, because Revere wasn't the only alarm rider. There were many alarm riders, and this is a signal telling them which way the redcoats are going. And that's important because you see, here's Boston. And because Boston is almost an island, you've either got to march troops down this way, one if by land, or you've got to row them across the river and march them this way, two if by sea. One if by land, two if by sea. The reason the alarm riders need a signal is that they're going to pass through different towns depending on which route they take. And so the alarm riders need to know which towns to go to and tell everybody, get ready, because there's an army coming through here in a couple of hours. So also, you see Charlestown over here. It was so dark at night in 1775, you could light two candles in Boston and see them across the river in Charlestown. And over in Charlestown, there are some other patriots who are getting a horse ready for Paul Revere. So Paul Revere, also a portrait by John Singleton Copley, is going to leave Boston, row across the river in a rowboat right under the guns of a British man of war. He's going to get his horse that somebody's got lend him, and he's going to ride to Concord in Lexington. Now, his plan is to go this way, but what's going to happen is he runs into some redcoats here, and so he takes a little detour up here, and then comes back to the main road. Menotomy is the old name of the town. That is, if you know the Boston area, the town that is now called Arlington was called Menotomy in those days. Revere is going to get to Lexington. Here's Lexington around midnight. And when he gets to Lexington, he knows that John Hancock and Samuel Adams are in Lexington that night. They are staying at the Hancock Clark House. That's Hancock's cousin was married to Jonas Clark, who was the minister in Lexington. So they're staying at the minister's house. Revere is going to warn them they better get out of town because the redcoats are coming. He also is going to alert Captain John Parker, who is the captain of the Lexington militia. And so Parker is now going to start mustering his militia in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, while this is going on, there's another alarm rider, William Dawes. So William Dawes sets out from Boston by the land route. He's going a different way. So in case Revere gets captured, he's going a different way. He'll have a chance to get through. So he takes the land route and then catches up to Revere around 12:30 in Lexington. So now the two of them are going to get ready to ride to Concord and raise the alarm in Concord. While they're in Lexington, they meet another guy, Samuel Prescott. I don't have a picture of him. This is just a picture of a guy on a horse. But Samuel Prescott was not supposed to be an alarm rider. He was a young doctor who lived in Concord, but he had a girlfriend in Lexington. Lydia Mulligan was her name. Mulligans were a family of clockmakers in Lexington. So um, Samuel Prescott goes to Lexington and to see his girlfriend, but what happens is Revere and Dawes ride into town, and they see Prescott, and they say, "Sam, you got to forget about your date. Come with us. We're going to Concord to tell them the redcoats are on their way." So about 1 o'clock in the morning, see the purple line here is Prescott. He's already in Lexington. So the three of them set out together. About halfway to Concord, they are intercepted by a British patrol. British patrol, well, Dawes actually turns around and rides back east. You can see him here. Um, Revere is captured. They hold him at gunpoint and they take away his horse. Eventually, they're going to let him go because they didn't want to keep him as a prisoner. They just wanted to stop him from getting to Concord. But Prescott escaped. See, Prescott, he lived in Concord. He had a girlfriend in Lexington. He knows every rock and blade of grass between Lexington and Concord. So he jumps his horse over a wall and he takes off into the darkness. And he gets to Concord around 1:30 in the morning and raises the alarm here and then continues on to act in another town to the west. Um, in Concord, um, the leaders of the town, uh, uh, Colonel James Barrett of the Minutemen and Reverend William Emerson, very respected leader of the town, they're going to start mustering the Minutemen and getting ready to mount their defenses. Um, Now, here's General Gage again. He's got his troops. They are marching through the night. They're marching in the dark. Um, they are assuming, really, that everybody's going to be asleep. They don't know the alarm riders have been riding out ahead of them. So they're just figuring everybody's going to be asleep. They're going to catch everybody by surprise when they get here. Uh, this is a force composed of grenadiers and light infantry. Uh, these paintings are by Don Troiani, who is he's up in Connecticut, really a specialist in American military history. Very, very good artist. He researches these pictures exhaustively to the accuracy of the weapons and the uniforms and all. So the grenadiers were chosen for their size. They were chosen for the size and strength. Um, You'd be 6 foot to be a grenadier. And the light infantry were the most athletic men. So their job was not to stay on the road, but to be the flankers, the ones who spread out into the countryside and mixed it up close and personal with their opponents. Um, so this was a force that was designed to move fast and hit hard. So they are coming out from Boston. They get into Lexington around 5:30 in the morning, just as the sun is starting to peek over the horizon, um, expecting that everybody's going to be asleep because it's 5:30 in the morning. But what happens is they're coming from Boston this way, okay? And there's the road to Concord. There are other buildings on the green, but these are the important ones. The Buckman Tavern. The Buckman Tavern is where the Lexington militia had mustered the night before. And the meeting house is kind of, if you've ever been to Lexington, it's where the statue is now, is where the meeting house was. Captain Parker, commander of the Lexington militia, he's got his 77 men with their muskets right here. Now, this is the road to Concord. He's not guarding the road to Concord. What's he doing up here? That's the road to the Hancock Clark House, which is where John Hancock and Samuel Adams are. He's not trying with 77 men to stop 700 men from getting to Concord. He is trying to protect Hancock and Adams. But when the British troops march in at 5:30 in the morning, they don't know that. In fact, they can't even see Parker's militia until they past the meeting house. Once they pass the meeting house and they see the militia, their mission is to go to Concord. But if you're an army and you see 77 men with guns standing there, you're not just going to walk on past them and go, "I have a nice day." You're going to engage with them. So what they're going to do is they're going to pull two companies of light infantry, that's about 65 men, out of the main vanguard, and they are going to face off against Parker's militia. Parker orders his men not to fire. He says, "Do not fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." Major Pitcairn, commanding the Redcoats, also orders his men not to fire. They're just trash talking each other at this point. Now, right about this time, Pitcairn orders Parker's militia to disperse. Why does he think he can do this? Well, he thinks he can do this because this is more than a year before the Declaration of Independence. We're all still British subjects. So Pitcairn believes that he has the authority to command Parker's militia to disperse, and he does. And just as he's doing that, somebody fired a shot. And historians have been arguing for 251 years who it was fired that shot. We still don't know. But whoever it was, they were disobeying orders. However, once that shot was fired, the light infantry here fired off a volley straight at the Lexington militia. They killed 8 Lexington militia and wounded several more. Some of the Lexington militia who were killed were shot in the back, which gives some credence to the idea that they were actually complying with Pitcairn's order to disperse at the time that the shooting started. As soon as this happens, though, Parker's militia does disperse, and let's go back here. Parker's militia does disperse. The two companies of light infantry fall back in with the main vanguard, and the whole force just continues on to Concord, which was their mission all along. Now, a scout from Concord, Reuben Brown. This is another engraving by Amos Doolittle. This shows the fight. There is the meeting house I showed you on the map. There's the Buckman Tavern. Whoop. There's the Buckman Tavern, which is still there. That's a historic house that you can visit. So here's the main vanguard of the Redcoats over here. Here's the two companies of light infantry, and there's Parker's militia. So the artist here, Doolittle, he was taking his cue from Revere. He was really drawing this to make it massacre. Anyway, Concord had sent a scout, Reuben Brown, to Lexington, and as soon as he heard the shooting start, he got on his horse and raced back to Concord. When he got to Concord, he reported to his commanding officer that he had heard a shooting, and his commanding officer says, "Were they firing live ammunition?" And which kind of suggests that maybe they were hoping that that they were just trying to scare the Lexington militia by just firing powder but no ball. But Reuben Brown had left before he saw the carnage, and so he said, "I'm not sure, but I think it probable." So in Concord, this is a map that is lifted from Bob Gross's book, The Minutemen and Their World. So this is the center of Concord right here. So you got the First Parish Meeting House and the Wright Tavern are going to be right here, and the North Bridge is up here. And there's Walden Pond. We'll talk about that next week. So 700 Redcoats, they are marching into Concord. There they go. when they get into the center of town, um, the Minutemen are not there. The Minutemen know they're going to be outnumbered. So the Minutemen have drawn back over here to the other side of the North Bridge. They are going to wait here because they know alarm riders are going to all the nearby towns of Lincoln and Sudbury and Acton and Bedford. All those towns are going to send their militias to join the fight. So they're waiting here for reinforcements. From a military standpoint, this is a very good place to wait for reinforcements because, first of all, you're on the high ground so you can see the redcoats coming. Second of all, when the redcoats come, they have to cross the bridge. And so they're going to be in a bottleneck. I have to be careful when I say that. Sometimes if I say it too fast, I say that they have the rednecks in a bottle coat. It's actually the redcoats in a bottleneck. So Colonel Smith and Major Pitcairn commanding the British troops, they have the 700 men split up and spread out all over town because the weapons aren't all hidden in one place. They're hidden in people's attics and cellars and barns. So they're searching for the hidden weapons. And one of the places that they're going to go, here, this is the center of Concord again, is Ephraim Jones's Tavern. Now, Ephraim Jones is hiding weapons at his well, he was multitasking really, Ephraim Jones, because he had a tavern, but he was also the jailer, and the tavern was adjacent to the jail. So if you had any leftover food from the tavern, he could feed it to the prisoners. So in the jail yard, he had buried a couple of cannons. And the redcoats came looking for them, and they actually knocked him down. They found the cannons, and they damaged them beyond use. They damaged the cannons by knocking the trunnions off them. Like you, I needed to look up trunnions. That's a trunnion. This thing here. That's what holds the cannon barrel on to the gun carriage. Without the trunnion, you can't aim the cannon, and without the trunnion, when you fire the cannon, it just goes flying off in the other direction. So if you bust the trunnions off a cannon, you have basically disabled it for your opponent to use. So they missed another treasure at Jones's Tavern, though, because Henry Gardner was the treasurer of the Provincial Congress. He was staying at Jones's Tavern, and he had a chest full of money and secret papers that was hidden in his room. He had a room at the end, but there was a worker at the inn named Hannah Barnes, and she told the redcoats, "Oh, you can't go in there. That's my room." She appealed to their sense of propriety, so they never found the money or the secret papers. So I'm looking at the time. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. The redcoats had seen the Minutemen pull back across the river. You know, if you're carrying out any kind of military action in a town where there are rivers, you need to control the bridges. So British officers sent a company of light infantry to seize the South Bridge. They sent 7 companies to the North Bridge. They left 3 companies to guard the bridge, and they sent the other 4 companies across the bridge to the farm of Colonel James Barrett, where they knew that that there were 4 bronze cannons hidden. And so they went out to Colonel Barrett's farm, demanded to be let in. Colonel Barrett himself was at the North Bridge, but his wife Rebecca was there. And they said, "We have orders to search your house from top to bottom." And of course, because we had gotten the warning, the alarm riders had been here several hours before. All of these things had been moved to new hiding places, and the redcoats didn't find them. They were very frustrated. just marched 20 miles and not found anything. They demanded that Rebecca Barrett give them food and drink. And she said, "We are commanded to feed our enemies." And they offered to reimburse her. And she said, she refused. And they threw some coins at her. And she looked down and said, "This is the price of blood." Um, Now, back at the North Bridge here, there's still three companies of light infantry at the North Bridge. They see the Minutemen. The Minutemen now have their reinforcements, so there's about 450 men up here. They start advancing towards the North Bridge. Um, and so the Redcoats are kind of getting into battle formation on the east side of the bridge, and they see the Minutemen coming down at them. They didn't really look quite like they looked like pirates here. They didn't really look so much like pirates. They looked more like this. This is another painting by Don Troiani. That's the old manse up there. That's Reverend Emerson's house. Um, so Colonel Barrett is drawing the Minutemen up into battle formation. The Redcoats are trying to get into battle formation on the other side of the bridge over here. And one of the Redcoats fires a shot into the river. And at the sound of that shot, the Redcoats all opened fire. And they killed two of the Minutemen, wounded several others. And that's when Major John Buttrick, that's this guy here, Major John Buttrick, gives the order to return fire. Say fire! And the Minutemen shoot back, killing three Red. Now, you understand, Major Buttrick sounds like he's pretty upset, right? But you got to understand, here's the Minutemen, right? Where's my cursor? Here's the Minutemen. Here's the Redcoats. There's Major Buttrick's house. So there's his house, and there's the enemy army. This is personal for him. For God's sake, fire! Minutemen return fire, killing three Redcoats. And so this is actually the viewpoint that you're looking at the battle from is the windows of the old man's. It's the windows of Reverend William Emerson's house that you're looking at here. Now, Reverend William Emerson is the grandfather of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is going to live in that same house in the 1830s for a year. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, of course, his grandparents, his father, not quite 5 years old, witnessed this battle. What happened here is very important to Ralph Waldo Emerson. And 62 years later, in 1837, he is going to write the Concord Hymn. And the Concord Hymn is where we get the phrase, "the shot heard round the world." Now, when he called it the Concord Hymn, that's the title of it, and he meant it to be sung. He meant it to be sung to an old hymn tune, which some of you may recognize, because here is the choir of the First Parish in Concord singing the Concord Hymn to the melody that Emerson had in mind. I hope this works. Otherwise, I'm going to have to sing it. You don't want that. There it is.
Sorry, Victor, it's not working.
Not working?
No.
All right. Wait.
I think you're going to have to sing it for us.
You can't hear it?
No.
I think you have to. There's a button you can push, but it's a little complicated.
Here come the basses. There we go. Did you hear that? Did you hear the music?
Yeah,
A little bit.
that was better. Yeah.
Okay, that was the first parish choir in 2013. So you did hear me sing it because I was in the choir in 2013. Yes, it was. So he had it. He wrote it to be sung to the tune of Old Hundreds, and it was sung at the dedication of a vital monument in 1837 by a choir that included a newly minted Harvard graduate named Henry David Thoreau. Now, one of the questions I hear most frequently from visitors to Concord is why isn't Lexington the shot heard around the world? And the reason Lexington isn't the shot heard around the world is because it comes from the shot heard around the world is a quote from a poem called the Concord Hymn. Ralph Waldo Emerson, of course, what happened in Concord is very important to him, but he was a smart guy. He went to Harvard. He knew that shots had been fired and men had been killed in Lexington 4 hours before the shots at the North Bridge. There is no question whatsoever that Lexington was the first shot. Something happened at the North Bridge that didn't happen in Lexington, and that's the order to fire. In Lexington, both armies were ordered not to fire. In Concord, Major Buttrick gave that very direct order, for God's sake, fire. The reason that matters is that this is a year before the Declaration of Independence. Everybody on both sides of that bridge is English. So when Buttrick tells his men to shoot the king's soldiers, he knows that's treason. He knows once he's done that, there is no turning back. He has started a revolution. And it's that treasonous order that Emerson is thinking of when he calls it not the first shot. He never called it that, but the shot heard around the world. So, redcoats fight at the North Bridge. After the 3 redcoats are killed, they begin their retreat back into town. The 4 companies that are over at Barrett's Farm hear the shooting. They come running back to the North Bridge. And what they find is that the men that they left to guard the bridge are all gone except for the dead ones. And the hill here is still controlled by the Minutemen. So they think, they're sitting ducks. They're all going to die. But what happens is Colonel Barrett does not order his men to fire on them. Colonel Barrett allows them to pass and join the retreat. That's the last time that happened. Historians believe that this may have been, we didn't know at this point whether we were at war or not. And if we weren't at war and we shot those guys, we shot first. If we shot first, that's treason. They'd hang us all for treason. So they let them pass. They rounded up the rest of the 700 redcoats here in the center of town and started the march back to Boston. When they got to Merriam's Corner, now all morning long, alarm riders have been going all over the countryside, and towns as far as 30 miles away are sending their militias to join the fight. By the end of the day, you're going to have 3,600 Massachusetts militia engaged in the fight. So by around noontime, as the redcoats are retreating here past Merriam's Corner, they encounter a detachment of militia from the town of Billerica. And the Billerica militia opens fire on them without having been fired on first. That's the first time a colonial militia fired on British troops without being fired on first. So that's pretty compelling evidence that between 10 a.m. and noon, it had become clear to everybody that we were, in fact, at war. So here's another Don Troiani painting that shows the redcoats retreating. The grenadiers, they're the guys with the big hats. These guys are the light infantry. They're the flankers. They're headed off into into the landscape to get up close and personal with the Minutemen. There's Colonel Smith, there's Major Pitcairn, but it's going to take them several hours to get back to Boston. One nonstop fight the whole way. 75 British troops and 50 Americans are going to be killed by the end of the day. British military records indicate that there were 3 soldiers killed in Concord. James Hall, Thomas Smith, and Patrick Gray. 2 of them are buried at the foot of the the North Bridge. And this marker was placed there about the time of World War I. The quote is from the American writer, what's his name? Lowell, James Russell Lowell. Kind of unusual to see this level of respect paid to a fallen enemy. But this was almost like a civil war, because both sides called themselves English, spoke the same language, ate the same food, dressed the same. You had members of the same family on opposite sides, so the respect is not that misplaced. Just want to kind of bookend at the end here, because I started off talking about First Parish and its patriot minister, Reverend William Emerson. Reverend William Emerson, the following year, became an Army chaplain, and he went to Fort Ticonderoga as an Army chaplain. Sadly, he contracted dysentery, when there wasn't much they could do for that in those days, and he tried to come home to Concord to recover, but he only got as far as Rutland, Vermont, and he succumbed to his illness there, and he was buried in Rutland, Vermont. There is a cenotaph for him in the Hill Burial Ground in Concord, but he's not buried there. He's buried in Vermont. But this is right across the road from the First Parish in Concord. Now, after William Emerson died, he was only in his 30s. The First Parish needed a new minister, and they called Reverend Ezra Ripley, who you see there in the portrait. Reverend Ezra Ripley, another new Harvard graduate, got William Emerson's old job, and next thing he did, he married William Emerson's widow, Phoebe Bliss Emerson. And then he moved into William Emerson's old house, the Old Manse, and he served as the minister of First Parish for 63 years until his death at the age of 90. A lot of radical change happened at First Parish during his long tenure. One thing was that they changed the design of the church. They added the steeple in 1791. He also was kind of a religious liberal, and not everybody in his congregation liked that. And so in 1825, the First Parish split. In 1825, the more orthodox component of the First Parish resigned, and they formed a new church, the Trinitarian Congregational Church, about a block away. And from that point on, the First Parish called itself Unitarian. This just for context, last week, Zach was telling you about Reverend William Ellery Channing's Baltimore sermon in 1819. So this is 6 years later. The First Parish becomes Unitarian and still is. But liberal as their theology was, there were those in Concord who still yearned for an unmediated experience of the holy, something Unitarianism could not offer. And so they were the Transcendentalists. And we'll talk about them next week when I get into Concord's literary history. Before we go to Q&A, and I don't know how much time I've got for Q&A because we're running kind of long here, but I do want to show you a couple of books that I used for research and you may be interested in. The one on the left is Lemuel Shattuck's History of Concord, published in 1835. It is, of course, out of print, but you can usually find copies on the used book market. The Spirit of 74 tells about Ray and Marie Raphael. That tells of the buildup to the American Revolution. This is Bob Gross's The Minutemen in Their World, won the Bancroft Prize in 1977. Very, very good social history of Concord at that time. Paul Revere's Ride by David Hackett Fisher is kind of the book that everybody goes to. And this is a real rare one. In 1985, the First Parish in Concord published a history of the First Parish in Concord. Just a couple of thousand copies were printed. Most of them were given as gifts to new members joining the church. Up till about maybe 5 years ago, they ran out of them. So it is, of course, very rare and out of print, but you can find them on the used book market.